I'm Lynette Zalesny. I'm the Accreditation Liaison Officer for WASC, and today we have a panel that is here to share with you the work that they have done on our self-narrative, which describes our story here at Fresno State, the work that is done by all of you to transform students and to give a high-quality education to students that come to Fresno State. This is a very important document, and it's a very important document to get right. So we're very happy that you are here to listen to the work that has been done over this past year, and the most important piece is for you to give us feedback, questions, share concerns, share what you think we should close with regard to the big picture, because the conclusion has yet to be written. So you will be part of helping us frame that conclusion. So with that, many of us are just returning from a WASC conference. We had representatives from the faculty, staff, and administration. 9 of us went to WASC. One of the things that we did here is that the importance of the self-narrative is now in caps. It's underscored because they have changed the WASC process. So really, it is very important that we get out and we consult with you about whether or not we have this right. With that, I would like to, again, share with you a bit about my team. And again, there's 38 of us that are on the WASC steering committee. You will find their names on the back of your handout. And so one of the things that's important for you as you leave today is to identify someone that you can seek out as an ambassador to share with you more about WASC personally. And of course, I'm always available for that as well. I'd like to turn it over to another great representative on this initiative, and that is Dr. Andrew Lawson. And Andrew comes as the faculty chair of WASC, and he will share with you about the process we've been through to get to this point.
Thank you. So first, I just wanted to point out a few things on the cover slide here. One is the website for WASC Senior. So wascsenior.org is the WASC website that really contains the handbook of accreditation. That's essentially the rule book that we play by, and it outlines what has to go into the self-study. So if you're looking for any additional information about WASC or what some of these CFRs and standards are, that's where to look. There's also how to submit some questions to us on Twitter. If you tweet, we can take questions, and also feedback through Twitter. And lastly, and I guess that isn't up there, but I have it on a later slide, is our WASC website for the university. We have a web forum there where you can provide feedback to us through the university WASC website, which is just fresnostate.edu/WASC. Got that right, didn't I? Okay. A little overview of where we're going with our presentation today. I'll give a kind of a recap of what WASC is and the process for accreditation and reaccreditation. We'll talk about our process so far, so how we got to this point and where we're going next. And then each of the lead authors from the 7 different essays in the self-study will give a summary of their key findings and points, and then we'll have some time for questions and feedback at the end. So just very briefly, in the United States, there's a process of regional accreditation. So there are 6 regional accreditors. We fall under the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, or WASC. And the process of regional accreditation really is a process to assure quality in higher education. It's a peer review process. Regional accreditation allows our students to transfer credits between junior college and a 4-year college, or for us to recognize for our graduate schools another bachelor's degree, or for our master's degrees to be recognized if a student wanted to go on to get a PhD. So that system of quality assurance allows our students a great deal of sort of mobility. If we wouldn't recognize another school or another credit if it didn't have accreditation. It also allows students to receive federal financial aid. Any school, in order to participate in the federal financial aid programs, we need regional accreditation. So we know how important that is to our students. Really, if we didn't have regional accreditation, we essentially wouldn't have students. So it's a very important process. And more importantly, because really, in the state system, we really do a great job. We're not really at risk of losing our accreditation. It's really an opportunity for us to really meaningfully do a self-study, reflect on what it is that we do well and what it is that we could do a better job at. So this is really an opportunity for self-improvement as a university. So a little bit about some of the background and jargon with WASC. WASC has 4 standards of accreditation. There's 3 broad value goals, and then there are 4 standards of accreditation relating to institutional purpose, achieving our educational objectives, resources and structures for sustainability, and finally quality assurance and institutional learning. So those 4 broad standards each have a set of what we call CFRs, or criteria for review. And the criteria for review are essentially more detailed and specific standards that the university has to meet. Each one of these has a number of different CFRs or standards. So for example, standard 1, CFR 1.1 to 1.8, that means there's 8 separate criteria for review there. So in total, there's 42 separate criteria for review. And those things look like this. So I won't read that one to you, but that's just an example. CFR 1.2, let you peruse that a little bit. So collecting data about student learning, making that data public, providing measures of graduation and retention, student learning outcomes, those sorts of things. And then here's CFR 3.3, maintaining appropriate levels of faculty and staffing, professional development, learning, etc. So these CFRs go all the way from, do we have an independent governing board, all the way to things about how we measure student learning and outcomes assessment. So the self-study process isn't just, here's the 42 CFRs and how do we meet each one, bulleted out. Instead, they have 8 essays. And these 8 essays, we're each going to talk about our 8 separate essays, go from an introduction all the way down through a conclusion. And each of these discusses various parts about the standards, and those standards and CFRs are embedded throughout each one of these essays. So one of these essays may cover 5, 6, or maybe a dozen different CFRs across 2 or 3 different standards. So those standards and CFRs are interwoven throughout the self-study. And if you go and download our self-study, which is available on the WASC website, you'll see the CFRs embedded in there in each one of those headlines. Okay, so that's the sort of technical jargon on WASC. Our campus process, we really started in earnest in fall 2012. There was a new handbook that was released, or a new set of rules essentially for WASC. And the biggest changes in that new set of rules were that they had asked campuses to define the meaning, quality, and integrity of the degree. So that is, what does it mean to have a degree from Fresno State, regardless of whether it's a geology degree or an English degree, or any degree that you can think of in the institution? What are those things that we share in common? What are those things that are unique about a Fresno State degree? Another change was the 5 core competencies. So written communication, oral communication, quantitative reasoning, information literacy, and critical thinking. Thank you. There's always the 5th one that you don't remember. So those 5 core competencies are not new to an institution, but new that WASC requires that we specifically document the learning of those core competencies. So because those things were new, we established 2 subcommittees to figure out how we're going to measure those core competencies and what does it mean to develop, to have a degree from Fresno State. We also have the executive committee, which is about 12 individuals on the executive committee. The larger steering committee is, did you say 38 now? It's grown over the years. And both of those committees have met monthly since fall 2012. By fall 13, we were ready to start actually writing the self-study. So we had formed groups. There was somebody from the executive committee that served as lead author on each one of those separate essays. But it was a group of anywhere from 5 to maybe 8 people helping to author each one of those self-studies. Those went through 2 rounds of revision. Just this last January, we sent it out to Dr. John Shields for an external review, who was our previous lead author in our last round of reaccreditation. We got those revisions back. Gil Hartunian did some additional editing to take it from something like 23,000 plus words down to the required 18,000 words. And then another round of editing, and that version is now posted on our WASC website. So please, if you haven't already had a chance to look at it, please go to the website, take a look at it, and try to provide us with any feedback that you can. So where are we going next? August 2014 is actually when the self-study is due, so our very final version will be done. So we still have a little bit of time, but we'll be spending the summer really polishing up that, taking this feedback and polishing up the self-study. In November of this year, November 20th, there will be an off-site review, which is essentially a Skype call with our external review team. In that Skype call, they will identify certain areas of lines of inquiry, they call it, where when they come back, these are the things that they're going to be focused on and asking questions about. And then almost a full year later, in late October of 2015, is the actual on-site review when our WASC team will be spending a few days on campus, meeting with various groups, looking over various documents, and really doing their full assessment of our campus. Okay, so that's the background for the process so far. And then now we're going to go through each one of those 7 essays or self-narratives, just to give you a brief summary of our major findings. So I had covered the introduction. So some of the major findings from the introduction serves really to set the institutional context, to basically tell our story about what we are as an institution. So that really describes us as, what we are, a regional, minority-serving, primarily first-generation commuter campus. It outlines some of the major changes that we've had over the last 10 years since our last reaccreditation. And that includes some of our demographic changes. We are now more Hispanic serving than we were 10 years ago. We are more Pell eligible than we were before, so in greater financial need. It talks about our recent changes. So in the last 10 years, we've got our classification as a Carnegie engaged institution and describes a little bit about that process. It talks about our recent capital campaign that was just concluded, some of the changes in infrastructure, including technology infrastructure as well as physical infrastructure like new buildings, those sorts of things. The second section of the introduction asks the campus to respond to previous commission actions. So when we get a reaccreditation, the commission basically points out, here are several points that we would like you to be working on. So 10 years ago, they gave us a list of, here are the points that we'd like you to be working on. One of those was to strengthen the assessment of general education program and generally strengthen assessment campus-wide. So we go through quite a bit of detail in the self-study outlining our process. Over the last 10 years, we developed a new set of general education learning outcomes. We instituted a process where we ask departments to submit assessment reports for their GE courses. And we also talk about some of the new things that have gone on for program assessment and some of that infrastructure. Another WASC Commission recommendation was faculty expectations for research. And where are we as an institution within the higher education community? There was talk 10 plus years ago about Fresno State moving more towards as a Research 1 institution. And so at the time, there was a lot of faculty confusion as to how much research are we really doing? Are we a teaching institution? Are we a research institution? That question really has been solved. We sort of answered that. We're not becoming a Research One institution. We've really settled in on a sort of teacher-scholar model with teaching as a primary emphasis still. So there's a brief description of that in terms of how we've settled that question. Okay, so the next section is section 2, which is compliance with WASC standards and federal regulations. So Dr. Neff.
So in this section, we're asked to do two things. One, the compliance review section, we're asked to provide policy documents in support of each of the criteria for review. So if there's 42 CFRs, you'd expect that there's at least 42 documents. Actually, there's 51. And our campus came through very well on this section. We've got basically all of the policies in place. I think our conclusion there is that our policies are clear, shared governance is strong. So the compliance review was pretty easy. And then the second part, the review under the standards, we are to look at each of the CFRs, and then we're to make an assessment of our campus. Is this something that we do very well? Is it something that we do kind of well? Is it something that we don't do well at all? And then a second rating is how important is that policy to us or that CFR to us? So it's possible that a particular CFR we might not do very well, but we don't think it's very important. And we're just going to be honest with WASC, because if we don't tell them the way it is, they'll find it. So Andrew kind of led this effort last summer. We had a group of our WASC committee did this, and we came up with a document that looked kind of like this, that said, okay, for any CFR, if it's a high priority and we don't do it very well, then we've got red on there. If it's a high priority, we do it well, there's not really much we need to do about that. If it's something that we think that we want to highlight, then we put it in green. So we had these green, yellow, the stoplight analogy. We went through it. We identified some of the greens there because they did say, okay, what are your strengths? So you'll see on the slide here, we identified 4 things that we feel like we do pretty well. Our strategic planning seems to stand out. We have a regular strategic planning updating process. Our student success focus, Maxine's going to talk about that a little more. The faculty evaluation process seems to be pretty good compared to some other institutions, so we wanted to highlight that. And then finally, we have a strong diversity focus on our campus. We value diversity. We talk about that a lot. We do things about that, so we highlighted that. But we found about 9 areas where we're a little concerned, and so these are areas that you'll hear addressed in the next sections. First of all, value and character is supposed to be front and center in the mission statement, and it's not. So we just tell them the next round of a mission statement revision, we're going to look at that, and we'll talk about how we might incorporate that into it. Student learning outcomes, we've been at this for 20 years. We have student learning outcomes in most courses, in most programs, but there's no standard associated with a particular student learning outcome. So we have this learning outcome that says students will be able to read and write, but we don't say what level. So that's something that we recognize as a problem. WASC wants to see information about assessment that's publicly available, and we don't do a very good job of that, so we had to put that out there. The meaning, quality, and integrity of the degree language that WASC uses, we've never used that language, and they say, what's the meaning of a Fresno State degree? How do you assure quality? How do you make sure that the degree that you're putting out there has some integrity to it? So we recognize that that's something that we're going to have to address in the future. Information literacy is not something we've talked a lot about on our campus. The library handles a little bit. There's pockets, but we're going to have to do more with that. Institutional learning outcomes, ILOs, we haven't had institutional learning outcomes, and so we spent quite a bit of time this last year working on a set of those. They've been discussed at the Senate level several times. We're not sure that they're bought into yet. They're not out there as thoroughly as they need to be, so we'll be talking more about that too. Our last WASC accreditation said we need to do a better job of GE assessment, and we do have GE assessment at the course level, but we're not at the program level yet. So we tell them how we anticipate doing that, moving from course-based to program-based GE assessment. we had to look at program review processes across campus, and we found a well-defined program review process in academic affairs, a well-defined program review process in administrative services, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what student affairs program review process is. We may get something from a new vice president before that visit takes place, but at this point it's highlighted in the draft as something we're looking for. And finally, we feel that there's probably a need for a broader conception of faculty development. We need to consider part-time faculty in that. And we also need to look at our overall faculty development process. So those were the standards that we looked at and highlighted as concerns. I thought you were next.
You were right. Sorry. I'm back again. Degree programs, which is the meeting quality and integrity of our degrees. Main take-home points from that. Again, we described our process for the development of those institutional learning outcomes that Dennis had just mentioned. So we began in fall 2013 in terms of drafting those. They've circulated through several committees. Executive committee has looked at it. We haven't had a full pass by the Senate yet, and people aren't necessarily well aware of those. So we've developed them. We're going down that road, but we still have a little ways to go. We also mentioned the possibility of the use of e-portfolios for demonstrating those institutional learning outcomes. We recognize that having to assess those institutional learning outcomes on top of our program level outcomes is going to be a strain for faculty. So we're looking for other ways to reduce that burden. And e-portfolios might be one of those ways where we could reduce some of that burden. For the meaning, quality, integrity of our graduate degrees, frankly, we just haven't done as much. We have approached the graduate committee to address the question and talk about what do our graduate degrees share in common. And I think they're thinking about that and they're working on that, but we've made less progress on it. So we just say straight up, we're not as far down the road with our graduate degrees as we are with our undergraduate degrees. The other part of that, so there's the meaning, which is what does it mean to have a degree from Fresno State, and then the quality and integrity are really what are your quality assurance pieces, and that's addressed elsewhere in the self-study as well, but we do talk about our processes for assessment on campus, our process of SOAPs, annual reports for SOAPs, and how we look at outcomes assessment as assurance of quality in our programs, and touch on the program review process a little bit as well. Okay, now it's running.
The next section of the WASC report is educational quality. In this section, we first briefly describe the existing mechanism on campus that ensure educational quality, such as strategic plan indicators, APM on quality of student learning, and our regular program review processes and learning outcome assessment processes. And because the core competency requirement of WASC came pretty recently, and the universities that go through the accreditation process this year and in the next few years can choose one of the 5 cores as evidence of student educational quality. So Fresno State chose written communication because we are relatively more developed in this area. And we had a team about this time last year. We collect a random sample of 250 student writing samples from 50 of the 80 writing sections. And in addition to that, we also collected 50 samples from the writing exam. And the total of 300 samples relatively represents Fresno student seniors who are at near the point of graduation. And in the summer of 2013, we had a faculty panel to review those writing samples using writing rubric adopted by the Writing Across the Curriculum Committee in Fresno State. And the results were included in the writing, in the WASC report. 71% of the writing course samples were rated at competent or accomplished level. The rubric uses 6 levels. Competent and or accomplished are the highest 2 levels. And with the writing exam samples, 94% of those samples were rated at competent or accomplished levels. We didn't have a standard if, how high a percentage would mean satisfactory educational quality in the area of written communication, but those 2 percentages would suggest that our students at least largely meet those requirements. For the other 4 core competencies, this section of the WASC report raises suggestions and gives projections how we should go forward with the evaluation of these core competencies. So there are 2 suggestions. One is to use a centralized model like what we did with the writing sample evaluation. That is, we collect student work through e-portfolio and use a university level committee and review panel to review those samples of student work using various means such as rubrics to judge if the core competencies are at a satisfactory level. Another model is decentralized. We will give programs and departments and faculty the responsibility to write a standard and do the evaluation. At this time, we need to continue thinking about which model would work best, and we need to involve more faculty and students and staff and administrators, the whole university community, in this discussion and conversation before we settle on a final working model. It is likely that we would use both because some of the 5 cores are suitable for universal evaluation, so to speak, such as critical thinking, information literacy, and written communication, oral communication would be required of all students and approximately the same performance levels. But with the quantitative reasoning, it is probably not suitable for us to use the standard evaluation on all students, since students in different disciplinary areas would have different focuses in quantitative reasoning in the courses they take and in the intensity of training. So we are still working on it, and the WASC report gives a suggestion that under the leadership of the provost, we would form a committee even when the WASC review is over. We continue working on this and set up a mechanism so as the university would follow those steps and continue the evaluation of core competency and infuse it with the student learning outcome assessment.
Thanks. The next section is the student success piece, and I'm happy to report that student success definitely is one of our pride points. And so in this section, we tried to clearly lay that out to WASC. However, it was important for us to go deeper into our student success data in terms of retention and graduation rates to make sure that we weren't masking any disparities. So we took a deeper look at how our underrepresented minority students were performing on various dimensions of student success, such as choice of major, participation in student leadership activities, honor societies, study abroad, etc. And when we dug into that data, I'm happy to report we found that our underrepresented minority students are proportionately represented. And we have this story to tell about how we are taking the students we have, not the students we wish we had, and showing impact, showing success with those students. And we have not lowered standards or raised standards for admission and et cetera. So pretty proud of that. A takeaway for us in looking at the data in this particular section was it is evident that we at Fresno State has had an unwavering focus on student success for well over 10 years. Our Student Success Task Force started in 2002 and still is growing strong. As a result of that work, we have a wide variety of discipline-specific initiatives. The pedagogy, the technology, and intervention strategies have been put in place to support student retention and degree completion. In the report on pages 40 to 43, you will see more detail about what we have done. Of course, student success is one of our top priorities, as evident in our mission, our strategic plan. And this work in 2009 intensified with the Graduation Rate Initiative, which challenged us to increase our 6-year graduation rates by 6 percentage points and half the achievement gap between underrepresented minority students and non-underrepresented minority students. So once again, I'm proud to report we are well on track to surpass the goal of increasing the 6-year graduation rate by 6 percentage points. We should top out at like 51% from 45% based on using the 2009 cohort as the tracking group. And there are some who believe that that group, the 2009 cohort, will have a 6-year graduation rate of 56%. So stay tuned and hang on and wait for the results. It is clearly evident that we are making really good progress with our students here at Fresno State. If you want more, you want to dig deeper into the evidence, then please look at pages 44 to 45 in the self-study because it is there we go deep. Thank you.
Good morning. In section 6, we looked at quality assurance and improvement, and specifically we looked at program review, assessment, and use of data and evidence. So our findings in that section, first of all, we have been evolving in what we call a culture of evidence and the use of data. We are making progress. Essentially what we're trying to say is we're using data to make decisions rather than making decisions and looking for the data later. So we're very pleased to see that. Obviously we have places where we are going to continue to grow, but that was a very good finding. Secondly, we also have found that the use of data and the culture of evidence is also prevalent through the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. We see a great deal of data being generated at the university level. We're able to see a very good picture of what the university looks like as a whole. So that's a positive finding. We do find that the programs have some areas in which to continue to grow in looking specifically at programmatic data and evidence that's available for decision making. A third finding that we had that specifically goes to program review was that we are not doing a particularly good job on follow through with the action plans. For those of you that have been through program review, you know that the last piece of the 2-year cycle is the development and approval of an action plan that will direct your activities and lead your department or your program for the next period till the next review. So we have not been closing the loop, so to speak. We've not been following up on that. So we know that we need to improve in that area, and we'll be making some efforts to do so. And lastly, we find that we are currently lacking in a method by which we actually look at how well program review is working, not at the programmatic level, but at the university level. Our are we getting information that's useful? Is the process that we've identified at the university level effective in doing what it says it's going to do and giving us the information? Just a side note on that, APM 220 is the current policy that directs our program review process. That is currently under review and has just come back out of AP&P. So we do expect to see some things changing in that arena in the near future, and certainly we will address in that revision a method by which we can effectively evaluate how well we're doing with the process. Thank you.
The last section we're going to present today is section 7 on sustainability, and we're asked to look at 3 things to demonstrate that the organization will be here, the institution will be here in 100 years or 5 years or whenever down the road. So the first thing they're asking for is how are you organized? How will that continue into the future? So we talk a little bit about the cabinet, the leadership, how that's been pretty continuous over time. Talk a little bit about Senate leadership, shared governance. So organizationally, I think we do okay. And then it asks us to address the issue of fiscal sustainability in 2 ways. Number one is what kind of processes are in place. So we describe the budgeting process at the university level, at the division levels. And then they ask, how are those budget allocation decisions aligned with the strategic planning of the university? And so we try to make the case that the president has a strategic plan, the divisions have strategic plans, and their budgets line up with those. The third area of sustainability that they want to know about, though, is are we understanding of the future environment of higher education, and are we positioned in a way to take advantage of what that environment is going to look like and respond to concerns? So they ask us to identify what some of the key concerns in the future are going to be and how we're positioning ourselves to address those. So we address 3. Number 1 is access, the issue of how students can continue to afford to attend Fresno State. That's a big issue. The second one, the accountability idea, is not only accountability to WASC or to ourselves, but it's, are we being accountable to the state of California that's funding us, to the legislators? Are we responding in an effective way to the broader constituents that we serve, who are our stakeholders? And so we make the case that we think that ePortfolios will allow us to showcase our students' best work, our students' work, our faculty's work, and the overall portfolio of the university to a broader audience. And so that's where we try to bring that together. And then the final thing that we're calling accommodation. How is the institution poised to accommodate a changing set of students? They're going through a Common Core now, K-12, that's very different than what we've experienced before. Are we ready at the institution to receive students who are trained differently? Are we adjusting our pedagogy? Are we going to be able to take advantage of the learning strategies that they have already used? And then finally, how do we incorporate technology? So those are the sustainability issues.
Would you join me in thanking the lead writers in all these sections? Now for the most important part. So I would like to know, first of all, your takeaway reaction to the work that's been done. And again, we're very open to candid comments. So any takeaways from this work? What stands out to you? And I'm going to come back with the microphone since we're being taped, and we'd love your question on tape. Please identify yourself also. Thanks, Ray.
Sure. Ray Hall, Department of Physics. I didn't know it was going to be under pressure and recorded here. I'm just curious, WASC seemed, the panel and all the hard work that's gone into this seems slightly independent of some of the regular structures where we think about curriculum, and so I'm thinking of the use of portfolios, for instance. When will the Academic Senate and other faculty organizations be brought into considering these proposals? Because they seem more like proposals than actual things that are hard set. So, I mean, it's hard for me to understand what part of the WASC write-up is kind of visionary and what part of it is something that's kind of set, forced upon us.
Great question. And I might note here that the most important part of today is to hear your feedback. So it helps us to go back and think about our framing and if we missed areas. So we won't be able to give you detailed answers today, except I would like to maybe say a quick comment about that. Since we're working with a completely new structure with WASC, much of this is new to all of us in higher education that are in the WASC accreditation region. So everyone is new, and so it does sound rather futuristic. However, I think you'll see as you go to the website and look at the narrative that largely we're using our history to drive our conclusions here. So you're exactly right. Some of this is to do because they're all new terms for us and a new process. But I think you make a good point that we need to sort of clearly align with our strategic plan and be very clear about what it is we still need to do in the future. Other comments? Ray, thanks for starting out the comments. How about concerns? Nora.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was looking for the other one. Nora Chapman, Modern and Classical Languages. I was very impressed by the organization of this report. It all made sense as it progressed. My one main concern was that I couldn't find and I know that it's acknowledged in the report, but I kept looking for a definition of the meaning of a Fresno State education. And what are these standards of quality and who actually defines those? Do we ask the faculty to define it? Do we ask some other entity? I'm really curious because this matters deeply. And finally, integrity. Are we talking about just the ethics of everybody on campus, or are we also talking about the integrated student who is not only academically skillful, but also knows how to give back to the community, as the Jan Baud Richter Center is highlighted in here? What do we mean by an integrated Fresno State student? And if this report could somehow communicate that we're very, very clearly that we have already tried to define this to a certain extent in our strategic plan 4, and then we're going to continue to do that, I think it would help, because I just wrote at the top, meaning, quality, integrity, when I was done reading it, and I was going, what's the answer? And I think it's exciting to think that we will come up with something that suits us at Fresno State.
Thank you. And actually, that you see all the panelists writing because it actually is on our capital letters to do. And they have to be multi-layered conversations. So the faculty, the students that are here, and also the community. So actually, we have been thinking about our plans for getting those definitions, but it has to be a collective definition. And it is a very important one. So thanks for underscoring that. To come. What other things?
My name is William Hardaway with the Learning Center. Given that our undergraduates currently enroll in about 13.2 units each semester, our rising Pell eligibility, how are we going to expedite the graduation process as the chancellor has charged us with, and maintain the grade quality?
Great question. I hope you're writing that down. Actually, President Castro and Chancellor White are asking us the same thing. That is actually something that I've been charged with as the incoming provost that we will have to address immediately. And again, we'll need your expertise. You're right, that is not in this WASC document. We don't have that plan in place.
We didn't address it in the document, but it's definitely something that is on the highest list of priorities for both the Graduation Rate Initiative and the Student Success Task Force. My own personal opinion is that definitely we need to look at what is it we can do to bring our remedial students up to speed, up to standards as quickly as possible. You know, what other interventions can we put in place? We have summer bridge programs. we have University One, we have some other things, but looking at that, I think one of the answers to closing that achievement gap and bringing our students up to standards, academic standards quickly, may be with the student support programs like EOP, Educational Opportunity Program, and maybe some discipline-based programs as well. So I think that's where we start. Learning communities, the first year experience, you know, all of the things that we have on campus currently, we need to look at just how impactful they are and what is it that we can do to expand them to a greater number of students.
Can I follow just for a few words? I want to comment on the definition of graduation rate we currently focus on. By we mean a very large we or us. There's a lot of myth in the way we define graduation. I just did analysis of our own data. And what I found is that those who graduated over 6 years, from 6 to 10, took a total on average 147 units. Those who graduated within 6 years, took a total of 142 units. So the number of years from entry to graduation is a myth, because you really cannot look at the calendar year to define how fast student progresses through the educational processes. Especially with our student body, we have fewer and fewer traditional proportions of students. A lot of students work at least half time. I would say almost 100% of students we have worked at least to some extent. So the better definition, we're in the process of proposing this to the system. It would be the ratio of required units and the actual earned units and attempted units. For example, in your major, if you have to have 120 units to graduate, you actually took 120 units to graduate, and you did perfectly, even if that process took longer than 4 years, because you might stop out and took fewer units, become part-time for 1 year or 1 semester. So the calendar year of counting graduation in itself is a myth. We need to look at the efficiency and success at the course level, like Maxine just said, how to make students do well in a classroom and learn better, then they will graduate. So we are working on it, and we want to explain that our success cannot be reflected by literally how many calendar years students took.
And I would like to add just quickly, student affairs and academic affairs will have to work very closely together to help address initiatives that will make sure that we're making progress. In terms of academic affairs, adding on to the brilliant statement from Maxine, we're going to be looking at high impact practices. So the research, again, shows that for underrepresented students in particular, one of the best ways that we can invest in them is to offer opportunities for high impact practices. Now, they're expensive. That means more undergraduate research opportunities, even in the first year. That helps engage students, more service learning opportunities, internship opportunities, study abroad. So many of the things that I know Professor Chapman works with her students in the Smith Camp College, we now need to bring that out to the wider body to help with that graduation rate. So it's going to be multi-tiered, and you'll hear much more about that. It's a great question.
Recognizing that not everybody agrees on the purpose of higher education, and given the attempt to define the meaning of our degree and then ultimately measure student success, where does the variable of gainful employment come in?
Thanks. Jim Marshall from the Kremen School, the Associate Dean. Gainful employment is a scary word for a lot of us because we're here to educate our students. And yet we know that stakeholders, the taxpayers, are also asking us to think about those students also being successful in their careers. So this is something that we need to address as part of student success. It will have to be a future conversation, and one that will be difficult for us, because Again, a number of our students, the type of students that we have, want to come and study the humanities, how to read, write, and think. And those are going to be very core, essential qualities and skills for students that will go out into these emerging careers that we have no definition or even identification of. So we have lots still to talk about with regard to employment and gainful employment. Anyone want to say something about that?
One of the things we've highlighted in this process is we can't address employment at all. We don't have placement data. So that's one of the next things we're going to be looking at is where do our students go upon graduation?
And we have to feel rather optimistic about that because we do know other CSUs do that. So we need to bear down and really get to that data. It's time to really figure out the strategy for getting that alumni data and those graduation employment records. Now, other questions? Hi, Dana.
Dana Luca, College of Health and Human Services. I'm really pleased to see the piece in the documents about long-term sustainability of resources, because the integration of advancement with grants and contracts and all of that, it's the three-legged stool. So it's really nice to see, and I can't wait to see the elaboration on it.
Other comments?
Nora Chapman, MCLL. I was really pleased to see the part about the GE assessment in response to the last WASC report. And there is a long paragraph about the faculty that we have and the fact that we rely on contingent faculty, and there was a definition of the difference between a part-timer and a full-timer. But we still, the elephant in the room is that oftentimes departments hand GE classes to their adjuncts. And the professors who are tenure track and tenured teach the upper division courses in the major. And I don't see that addressed here, and I do believe it's an issue because there's a disconnect. Some departments manage to bridge that gap, others simply do not. And I think students, their gateway to disciplines is GE. They start generally in GE. And they need a connection to people who have roots in the university, who don't feel so vulnerable, who don't feel that their job is always on the line from year to year or even semester to semester. And I suspect that WASC will continue to ask this question until we address the staffing.
Thank you. I think that is a note that we need to be very candid about and also think about as a progress being made. What are our plans for that? And I don't think that we have any, we haven't even had discussions on that, so that's a helpful comment. Now, with the last, Dean Elrod.
Susan Elrod, College of Science and Math. I think the group has done great work and would like to just encourage, maybe if now that all the writing's been done and you can just breathe for a minute, take a step back and look for innovation and distinctiveness, the last of our Ds in the logo, and maybe try to highlight, Joaning, what you talked about, I think is extremely innovative. We're doing innovative and creative approaches. We have amazing innovation here, and pulling those things out and highlighting them in the report, I think will help us get a better sense of who we are and of the exciting future. Not we do have challenges, but so maybe take a step back and try to think specifically about the innovation, the creativity, the distinctiveness that we have here at Fresno State, not only for our own selves, but I think it will help the team see that we also know ourselves as they might discover us. Right. So that's my encouragement to the team.
Thanks for the great segue, because I would like to hear from you with regard to our conclusion. The conclusion is yet to be written. These comments are so rich, so thank you for sharing them with us because it helps us to write the last chapter.
I just wanted to, I appreciate that comment because when the group, and it has been a long slog at getting this thing written, and we all remember group projects from our own high school and university days, this was sort of the ultimate group project, right? And it's easy to get lost in the down in the weeds and you're writing, and sometimes it's difficult to take that step back. So one of the reasons we really thought these forums were important was to really encourage fresh eyes to take a look at it. And really, it'd be great if even you read a section that really mattered to you. The whole report would be great, but if you could read something, and if you think of something that, you know, hey, that's something that's distinctive that we do and I don't see it, just a quick email or drop it into the web form. We just have, you know, again, we stop seeing things, and several things have been mentioned here today that I'm like, oh yes, we need to get that in there, and you know, we'll do it, we'll get it in there. We just need to be prompted and reminded of some of those great things that we do. So we're not omitting things because we don't think they're important. It's a big institution, and it's hard to remember all of the wonderful things that we do and some of those distinctive things. So we would really appreciate the feedback. So.
And again, a reminder how to give us feedback. This has been helpful. Your comments have been recorded because we thought it was important to share that with your colleagues. You can also go to our website. There's a feedback page. And again, you can tweet us. Last minute here, as we're writing the conclusion, the last chapter, we've heard a great beginning here to think about distinction. What other ideas do you have? What should we highlight in the conclusion?
I think that the word you used early on in the introduction, transformation. I think this is a transformational university, and we have a lot of evidence to support that.
And its location. The Central Valley is the most productive agricultural region on the planet. And that's what we work with, the students of this particular valley. So I'd like to see that in there as well.
Other things? I hope that you'll share with your colleagues your experience today and encourage them to also give us feedback. Dean Hironaka-Juteau.
Earlier, your comment in regards to just the workforce, I think many, just as the engagement with the region, which was reflected in the Carnegie designation, but also we prepare folks and we transform them to serve the region, and perhaps that piece in regards to that workforce can be pulled in that way.
And President Menchaca, do you have any comments from the student perspective?
I do remember reading this in the narrative regarding some of the student engagement components, but I do think it is important to highlight the fact that many students here at Fresno State are not only getting their education in the classroom, but they are getting it through service learning, through internships, as well as study abroad programs. And when we go back to Innovative, we're going to be one of the first CSUs to go to China this summer. We were one of the first CSUs to go to Fiji during January. I think highlighting some of those components about being innovative and engagement in what we do provide to students outside of the classroom.
Any last burning thoughts? I want to thank you. This has been a very helpful forum, and thank you for taking time to care about our WASC narrative. Much appreciated.